So thanks everyone for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about a cure for killware, healthcare's newest cybersecurity challenge. Today I have here with me, my name is Steven Selgrade. I am a senior marketing manager here at Critical Start, and I am just the MC for this event, and I'm about to turn it over to the smart folks here. Matt Herring, he's our director of cyber threat intelligence and detection engineering. And then he's going to pass it off to Russell Harnish, who's one of our senior security consultants. And they're going to talk to you all about kind of killware and threats to healthcare and how you can tackle them. So with that, I won't waste any time. I will actually just turn it over to Matt, and we can go from there.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. Just a real quick overview of the agenda for today. We're going to talk about what exactly is killware, walk everybody through a couple of case studies, a couple focused on healthcare, a couple more broadly focused on critical infrastructure, talk about a couple of strategies for risk management, and then turn it over to Russell, where we'll look into how you can help maintain and keep up that cyber health. Really what we're trying to do here is break through the hype. It's a pretty incendiary topic, really designed to drive emotion and engagements. What we want to do here is help people understand the risks and really get to the bottom of what this killware threat really is. And so let's talk about the incendiary language, the headlines, the things that people are trying to get out there to get the attention. A type of malware deployed to cause physical harm or cyber attacks that can literally end lives. The intent here isn't to downplay those risks, but to present them in a way that helps you understand what those risks are and then how to mitigate them. So let's talk about the reality here. Killware is existing malware that's employed in a way that could impact life and safety. It could be from external actors via ransomware, as we've seen in a few incidents. It could be from insider threat activity. A number of different use cases, a number of different approaches that ultimately the health and safety risk is due to a consequence of the attack and not necessarily the primary intent of that attack. One of the things that we are observing, though, is there is an increased willingness for threat actors to attack critical infrastructure. Even after recent political positioning regarding US response to attacks on critical infrastructure, we're still seeing that activity. And so it's something that we're going to be watching closely and to see how that changes the threat landscape. So let's talk about some case studies, some real world examples of cybersecurity incidents that had an impact or a potential impact to human life. So we're looking at some notable incidents here. One of the first cases that we look at is a potential negligent homicide investigation after a woman was unable to be admitted to a hospital due to a ransomware incident. And as a result, she had to be transported to another facility. It's currently believed that that delay is what contributed to her death. In this case, it was attributed to the doppelganger malware that had entered the system through a vulnerability. And so looking back at some ways to protect yourself, vulnerability management, patching, those types of processes, which is part of your basic security hygiene. Further investigation revealed that the hospital actually wasn't the primary target. It was actually the university that hospital was affiliated with. Once the attackers discovered that the hospital was impacted by this particular event, they actually provided the decryption key and made no further attempts to extort the hospital. Moving on to the next one, hospital ransomware in Alabama. This is actually considered the first instance of a human death related to ransomware. And so in this case, what had happened is a threat actor had deployed some ransomware, and as a result, took the hospital's infrastructure down. In this case, the hospital didn't want to pay the ransom. It impacted their operations. And as a woman was delivering, her baby didn't make it. And so this is it's currently under investigation, but the thought is that this is the first documented case of a human death related to ransomware. And so moving on to an incident where a sewage plant had a release of sewage. Stephen, I'm sorry to do this. I've had a little bit of equipment failure here. Let me fix my display real quick.
While you're doing that, I think, Matt, this transition from healthcare related facilities and things that are very obviously healthcare industry related to something like critical infrastructure kind of shows the breadth of this problem and this kind of this category of problem, right? A threat actor or threat actors are capable either deliberately or inadvertently of affecting human life and health, not just by attacking a hospital, for example, which I think is what typically comes to mind, right? They may even be able to impact a larger number of folks, have a larger impact by attacking something like, as you're mentioning now, critical infrastructure.
Exactly. And so I'm just fixing some of my slide shares. All right, and so looking back into the sewage plant, this is actually an example of an insider threat incident. And so in this case, we saw somebody who was refused employment with the company, was let go from another employer, and used radio frequency. So not even your normal malware, but an existing knowledge of the infrastructure to try and compromise those gates to release sewage into the environment. So it caused a pretty big stir locally, massive inconvenience for the locals and the residents around that area. And in addition to that, it did have an impact to the local wildlife. Moving on to the power grid incident in Ukraine. So this is a relatively notable incident where the current understanding of this is it was related to some geopolitical issues between Russia and the Ukraine. And so in this case, the threat actors targeted a power plant, or 3 separate power plants, impacted those industrial control systems in order to open up the breakers to cut the power in the middle of December in the Ukraine to about 230,000 residents in the area. So one of the first cases we've seen against a power grid. Water treatment plants. So in Oldsmar, Florida, we saw an incident where an individual noticed some suspicious behavior on their workstation attributed to an infected copy of the TeamViewer malware. In this case, they were able to stop the activity they had noticed. So the individual who was remotely operating that terminal was attempting to drastically increase the amount of lye inside the water system. They caught it, shut it down, and in this case, even though in this case there were systems in place to detect drastic changes in the pH levels, it just shows that there has to be multiple layers of controls in order to protect your environment. So let's walk through more broadly as to what the notable incidents timeline looks like. So 2000, first instance of an insider threat, Marucci Water. This was the sewage incident. We see in 2013, Iran targeting a dam in New York. Interestingly enough, this is actually a popular sentiment about this is it was mistargeted, and the proper targeted infrastructure in this case would have had much larger impact than the dam in New York. 2015, we see the attack on the Ukrainian power grid. 2016, we see the compromise on the water purification. We see another attempt in 2016 on an attack on the Ukrainian power grid. We start to see 2017, the ICS attack framework built. 2019, first alleged death due to hospital ransomware. And then in 2020, we start seeing an increase in this activity. More than 1 in 3 healthcare organizations reported that year that they were targeted in a ransomware threat. In addition, that's the year that we see the attack on the Dusseldorf hospital. Moving forward into 2021, the attack on the Colonial Pipeline caused some major supply chain issues in the US. And so only time will tell how this changes and how the attackers will continue to target that critical infrastructure. So let's talk about how to manage the risk. We've talked about a couple of approaches in some of the incidents. Let's dive a little bit deeper before we turn it over to Russell to give you even more details. Fault monitoring. And so monitor how your systems are performing. Industrial control systems, your hospital systems, make sure that things are working within their range of tolerance. Keep that monitoring going in case something changes. In this case, existing controls at the Oldsmar Floral Water Plant would have caught any changes to the lye content in the water and would have been able to shut that down before it had an impact on human life. Endpoint protection. One of the first ways that threat actors will target the environments, the organizations, is through the endpoint, TeamViewer, ransomware. In most cases, we see where either vulnerabilities are being exploited or they're being deployed via phishing emails. So it's always a good target to monitor those endpoints. In addition, continuous auditing. Continue to monitor your controls to ensure that they're operating effectively. Use that through audits, continuous validation, penetration testing, things like that are going to help you verify that your detective and your preventative controls are operating as expected. Finally, this is not an exhaustive list. You have resources available to you. There's industrial control system frameworks, there's NIST frameworks, there's CIS, there's benchmarks out there to help you ensure that you have the controls and the protections in place to appropriately protect your enterprise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. And honestly, listening to you, and obviously we've had discussions internally here at Critical Start. We're on top of the threats as they occur in the kind of the global landscape. But what's interesting about this killware term is that it's still pretty squishy. I think you're right. It gets a lot of, it's starting to get some headlines, and it has this kind of scare tactic associated with it. Not sure, killware is not a term that the threat actors gave it, right? Exactly. It's a term, it's a term that the industry has kind of given it. Security writers, so you got to remember where this came from. But as a class of threats, it's pretty broad. If you consider it's any threat that when successful or any exploit, a sequence of exploits that or malware when used effectively can result in human loss of human life or health, right? So it can be all these different things. But from a critical start perspective, how we look at this category of threats as a whole isn't a lot different, if any different, from other threats. Let's take like ransomware, right? Because ransomware has a giant footprint now in just mind share, like of everybody in our industry, of our customers, of our competitors. Quite frankly, everyone's trying to combat ransomware. But when it comes to our customers and how we as a partner go about preventing these types of attacks or helping to mitigate them, I kind of think in terms of analogies, right? And so that's why where the slide comes from. I think of cyber health as being very, very similar to physical health. Since we're talking about killware, right? Everyone thinks about some of these hospital incidents, for example. But cyber health is very similar in many ways to physical health, right? So you've got some basics that you need to do. And I think you need to be a good steward of your individual health, right? And then you also need good partners. You need good subject matter experts. And here I've represented them as doctors, but, there's a whole set of healthcare practitioners. Could be anything from chiropractors to the phlebotomist that takes your blood. They got to do it correctly. You need talent. But I thought of it in these kind of 4 categories, right? Exercise, hygiene, detection, and doctors are your healthcare practitioners. And from a cyber perspective, you see they kind of fall in this prevention area. Think of things like old school antivirus or firewalls, that type of thing. And then the detection and response area, which is kind of where we've evolved so far in the business. We kind of assume that prevention at some point is going to either break down or be evaded, and so we need a good detection and response mechanism. And so let's take these one at a time. So when you think of something like exercise, for example, right? Something a lot of us aren't that great with, right? It's one of those things that's tough. Think about, even in cyber, some of the basic things are very difficult, right? To get done. But, exercise really is fundamental to human health, not just exercise, but, I would put eating right, eating well in this category. Right. And I guess I would liken that overall on the security side to things like awareness, right? Security awareness is so important for any organization, including healthcare organizations or critical infrastructure. It's, how do you make your people a first line of defense, right? They have to be taking their own cybersecurity posture seriously as an individual, right? That's super important, right? So I kind of liken diet and exercise to something like awareness, and not reusing passwords, some of these really fundamental things. And then I think of hygiene as being another category from a health perspective. Obviously, we've all lived through 2 years of use your term, I wanted to use an expletive here. It's been very difficult on everybody, right? But when it came down to it, the advice was practice good hygiene. It was wash your hands, like very early on. And I don't know if this was everyone's experience on the call, but the supermarkets have really long lines, and everybody had hand sanitizer and soap and Lysol in their carts. And if you were like me, you're thinking, do you guys have soap? Aren't you doing this already? Right. But the things that we think are common are not so common sometimes. I think that's also the case in the cyber world, right? Patching, and I think you mentioned this, Matt, in one of the incidents, that the attack was essentially traced back to a simple exploit on a vulnerability that a patch had existed for it, right? One of the things that we need to do in the cyber world is practice good hygiene. So very similar to physical health, and cyber health is absolutely critical. You've got to keep systems patched. And as a former CISO, I know how difficult this can be, right? When you say, hey, this critical patch has to be deployed because of something like, log4shell, the log4j issue. When the application team says there's no way we could risk taking the systems down at this time and in the month because of our financial commitments or whatever it might be, it's very difficult to practice hygiene in the cyber world. But if you would do these things, right, these fundamental things, you already put yourself into a much better position to defend yourself against things like killware, ransomware, and these other, not just strains of malware, but other attacks that don't even involve malware, right? So moving on, I think, and this is where Critical Start focuses more. So when you think about physical health, you can eat right, you can exercise, you can practice good hygiene, keep yourself from being sick, but bad things can happen, right? And from a personal perspective, and I've had some people very close to me have the same diagnosis with very different outcomes recently. It was due to detection. So I not trying to get too personal, but I've had 2 folks close to me get lung cancer in the last few months. And the first individual had symptoms for a very long time, and just, I want to say tough guy, but, you know, just a real man, old school, kind of ignored it, thought it would go away. Right. And then I had another friend very close to me, coughed up blood once and called the doctor. Right. And so now, as you can imagine, the outcomes in those two cases were very, very different. The person that let it go, the doctors basically said there's nothing they can do for him but make them comfortable. The person that caught it early just finished surgery. I had to remove a lung, so it's very serious. But they described his treatment and procedure as curative, meaning he doesn't have cancer anymore. So those two outcomes so close together made it very, very, I don't know, personal to me that early detection is so important. And so when we talk about something like killware or ransomware or any of these other, you know, significant cyber threats, early detection is so important, right? And so here at Critical Start, that's one of the things we focus on. Matt?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that as well, is one of the things you touched on was the different specialties in the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just have a doctor. You've got your doctor, you've got your phlebotomist, you've got your x-ray technician, you've got a battery of professionals. In detection, it's very similar. And so you want to practice defense in depth. You want to monitor from initial access all the way to actions on target and everything in between. So you're not just looking for one thing. You're not just looking for that malware signature. You're looking for, okay, how did they get access? How did they run that exploit? Did they bypass phishing filters? They got access to the host. Let's look for some potential PowerShell activity. Let's look for some suspicious callbacks, some obfuscation techniques. On down the line. And if you can detect any one of those symptoms of the issue, then you're able to say, I think we have an incident on hand, and respond to it much more quickly. So it's really about the breadth and the depth of your coverage, not just looking for that one signature.
Yeah, and you know, and it makes me think of you know, if we go to the next slide, what it makes me think of is, you know, again, similar to your physical health, right? It, like my body that had a symptom that was pretty, I would say obvious, but people know their bodies, right? They know it, so they just don't feel off or something's not right. So the, you know, our customers and the individuals inside our customers have a responsibility to their organizations to report when they don't think something's right. But it also, like you just mentioned a bunch of things where as a secure threat researcher, they're not even things that I'm super familiar with as a CISO, right? As more of a business security person, right? What I know though, is that I need to marry people and their awareness with decent technology. So again, from a Critical Start perspective, there's no way we could do what we do, even though our team is highly trained and very motivated. We couldn't do it without our key platform, which takes all of this signal, you know, all of these blood tests and MRI results and cardiogram results and all this stuff. Think of it as putting it through an engine and saying, okay, now we know what's right, what doesn't look right. But now we also marry it with what we know about the patient, right? In our case, what we know about the customer. You couldn't do that without good technology. So it's really important to take kind of a dual approach. Make sure you've got the technology side covered, but you also have to have good people operating it, right? And exactly. and that plays right into our next slide here, which it does come down to people. I mean, technology implemented, even if it's implemented properly and it's installed properly, it's configured properly, it's powered up, it's on, it's running, we're still at the point where we need human beings that are smart, that are applying everything from the policy around it to, watching the alerts, to trying to apply real human cognition to the output. And that's kind of what there's the parallel with doctors, right? We rely on our doctors to look at, like, if you ever just go to your doctor for your annual, your physical, and they send you your blood tests in the mail, your blood results, you look at it and you're like, well, of course I need a professional that knows a lot more than me. Now, I know the basics of health. I can look and see if my blood sugar was high, or, some of these other things. But it really takes a professional. And so it's really important from a cyber perspective to have good partners around you, right? Obviously, at Critical Start, we feel like we're a great partner to our customers, but it takes an ecosystem for every one of our customers, manufacturers, service providers, incident response providers, so consultings, that type of thing, to really keep yourself in good cyber health. Do all the basics, keep yourself healthy to the extent you can, and then have good detection, right, of things when things are off, and then have a good network of providers around you. I don't want to keep this going too long, right? Because I think human attention spans can be pretty short. But I did want to talk a little bit about what we do, and I tried to weave some of that in to the presentation. But at Critical Start, what we do is take an approach to cyber health where, again, imagine that you're having every hour having blood drawn and tested, and you have results. And every hour you're having an MRI done, and you're having a CT scan and all this stuff. But all that the flood of information about your body is being fed back to us, and we're running it through our technology to say, okay, we're identifying the things that just don't look right, not just in general, but for you, because we have your results from previous, days, months, and years. And then we're investigating anything that we don't trust when we married up to your body and your previous results, right? We do that with our own platform, but we back it with our analysts to think of them as trained, CT technicians, radiologists, those types. And then we also have full-blown surgeons and doctors, think of those as our IR team, right? If you need corrective surgery, like my buddy that needed a very significant surgery to correct his situation, we have those too. And we apply those so that, in general, when we look at our client base is pretty healthy from a cyber perspective, because I think they're doing the right things on their own. And then they're using partners like us as just one of their partners to do a lot of the right things around them from a subject matter expert perspective. So, I think that's what we really wanted to convey. Again, this last slide, I think we put in there to make it bright, to brighten up the slides a little. Can be a dark topic, killware, but I think that's in summary. When we look at this, the killware as an overall kind of topic or category of threat, or something to be defended against as blue teamers, we really don't have to do too much different, right? It's good to be aware of it, but we really need to be doing the basics and have a good ecosystem around us. So that being said, I'll turn it back to you, Stephen, and thank everybody for their attention today.
Thanks, Russell, and thanks, Matt. I really appreciate it. I loved all the parallels you had there between personal health and cyber health. I didn't realize how many you could draw, but it's a great analogy.
We did our best.
You did. And so thank you guys for presenting. And we did have, I guess, just one question came in, and maybe you can answer this one, Russell, is we talked about healthcare, but we talked a little bit about critical infrastructure. Does Critical Start actually have a specific product for healthcare?
That's an excellent question. So the short answer is no. We have an MDR offering that covers essentially all the main endpoint technology, EDR technologies, and all the most the SIMs with the most momentum today. We support both of those, but the way we do it, and we have lots and lots of healthcare clients in different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, right? So everything from healthcare providers to pharma to medical device manufacturers, and but when it comes down to it, everything we do isn't necessarily customized to healthcare. It's customized to each individual customer. So customers that do have a healthcare environment, they have very like hospital specific OT, or they have manufacturer specific OT. We customize our service around it using the platform I mentioned earlier, so that it's not so much healthcare oriented as it is customer oriented. So if it were a pharma client, our service is customized to that pharma client, to what their actual environment looks like, from OT to administrative IT to their security controls. And then we end up learning not just about their environment, but it's important for us to capture in our system, so we provide the best service, to capture things like, what's the business climate, what are the business priorities, simple things like, what subnets are off limits for immediate intervention in terms of like isolating a host. So we're very specific to customers, but we're really not from a vertical perspective, I wouldn't say. Matt, unless you have something to add to that.
What I would add is, as part of the activities that we do with building detections to track and respond to incidents such as ransomware, our cyber threat intelligence team goes and digs into these threats, understands the campaigns, understands the infrastructure and the capabilities of the adversaries that we face, and then builds that detection content to look for that activity. So regardless of the industry vertical, the attackers, with their campaigns and with their infrastructure, we tend to see very similar patterns in their approach to gaining access and then, achieving their ultimate actions on objectives. And so our detections are built in a way that really casts a very wide net, looking at those tools, tactics, techniques, and procedures employed by the adversaries.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you guys for answering that question for us. That was it for questions. I would say if anyone has additional questions, you will receive a recording of this webinar, and you can reply to that email with any additional questions, and we can get the answers, whether it's from Russ or Matt or somebody else. But that concludes our webinar today, and we really appreciate everybody spending some time with us. Thank you.